Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to Interestinggg.com. Today we have a very, very special guest. We're going to get into a topic that we've talked about before on the show, and we think you're going to be pretty fascinated by this stuff. So this is Dr. Jack Kasher. Dr. Jack Kasher is Professor Emeritus of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, where he was a Peter Hewitt Distinguished Professor from 1981 to 1987. He has also received the Excellence in Teaching Award in 1985 at the Burlington Northern Foundation Faculty Achievement Award in 1986. From 1975 to 1992, he was a consultant and summer employee at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Livermore, California, where he specialized in electromagnetic theory and, among other things, did work in the Star Wars defense system. He spent the summer of 1991 working at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and continued his research with NASA, studying the surface of the sun until he retired in 2001. He has published 38 articles and reports in various journals, including the Physical Review and the American Journal of Physics, and has delivered or co-delivered 7 papers at national meetings. Dr. Kasher was Nebraska State Director for 25 years for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, an international organization dedicated to the scientific study of UFOs. He has also served as the Central Regional Director and currently is field investigator and consultant in physics for MUFON. He is past president of Paranormal Claims Research, a now disbanded statewide organization dedicated to the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. He has spoken more than 300 times on UFOs during the past 25 years, including appearances on local, regional, and national radio and television. So Dr. Jack Kasher has a far more impressive resume than Luke or I have.
A little out of our league.
But we are very excited to get into a conversation with him. And yeah, we think it's super interesting stuff. So we'll kick it over to Luke, and Luke will kick it over to Jack. Dr. Jack.
Yes. Thanks again, Doctor, for joining us. So we'll just start off here. I guess easiest way to put it is, how did you get started with the all your research that has to kind of deal with this category?
I think everybody's interested in UFOs. By the way, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Good. Everybody's interested in UFOs, and I was too, growing up. And somehow in the mid 1980s, I became intensely interested in it, reading and going to meetings and everything, and meeting people, and eventually started doing research and poking into some of these things myself, to the extent that then I would start giving talks myself at some of these national meetings, and one thing would lead to another, and then I would appear on television a number of times, about 20 times on national TV. I did some study about the space shuttle and that sort of thing, and it just kind of kept rolling. And what I could say this right off the bat when we start. I have talked to so many people that have told me what they have experienced about UFOs. And at some point, I just came to the realization that either everybody's lying to me or this stuff is real. And so many people had told me stuff that I can honestly say that, I'm a believer now. I'm saying categorically, UFOs are real. By that, I mean extraterrestrial people are coming and visiting our planet. They have been coming for a long time, and they are deeply involved in a bunch of different things that we will talk about here. In life, there are certain things that are true, and that it doesn't matter what people say to you, you know that they are true. And this is one thing I know is true. Extraterrestrials are real, and they are here, and they are visiting us. And I could go on, but they are deeply involved with our government. There is a massive government cover-up of UFO information, to the extent of which I'll give you several examples of that when we go along here. But this stuff is real, and people should know where I'm coming from when we start this program, and that's just how I feel.
That's amazing. I'm excited to get into this because, like you said, either everyone's lying or what? I mean, it's like, why would everybody choose one thing to lie about? And now we have video proof, and we have government officials coming out validating some of these conspiracies, quote unquote. So yeah, it's something that I'm very excited to hear some of your insights on, and yeah, we can just get into things. I guess if there's a place you would like to start, feel free to jump in, I guess. But
well, I'll tell you, the way I usually start my UFO talks, I've given a bunch of them around. I like people to have some kind of understanding that it is absolutely almost certain that there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. To the question, it's not a matter of are they out there, it's a question of have they gotten here yet. And the example I like to give, I've taught astronomy at UNO for a number of years. NASA has made a study that there are probably about 8 billion, that's 8 followed by 9 zeros, billion planets like the Earth in our galaxy, not planets. Planets like the Earth in our Milky Way galaxy, which is a group of about 100 billion stars, like a pancake with a middle that's kind of enlarged and spiral shaped. And that's just in our galaxy. And astronomers think that there are probably about 100 billion galaxies in the universe. That's 1 followed by 11 zeros. And if there are 8 followed by 9 zeros in each one of those planets like the Earth, that means there are maybe 8 followed by 20 zeros planets like the Earth in the universe. So to me, to think that we're the only one is just ridiculous. It's like back in the Middle Ages when we thought that the Earth was the center of the universe,
right,
around us. And poor astronomer Bruno was burned at the stake at 1600 because he dared to teach that the sun's the center of the universe, and the Earth goes around the sun. So anyway, I think it's preposterous to think that there is not intelligent life out there. And as a matter of fact, they have gotten here already. And I've got a number of examples, a couple from Omaha. But we should realize that this is an Omaha thing too. It's not like it's out in the sky somewhere. A couple examples in Omaha. I know a couple friends of mine who they lived in the Omaha area. They're not here anymore. The man has since passed away, and the wife lives in California someplace. But they invited some people over to their house, and they were going to go out to eat. And the other couple left and went to the restaurant, and they were getting ready to go. And they got in their car in the driveway, and they looked up, and there was a flying saucer over their house. It was about the same size as the house, about 100 feet above the house, and it just hovered there, lights around and everything. And they were stunned. They didn't know what to do. And so they watched it for a while. Then they thought they're going to go up to the restaurant and get people to come back and look. And so they backed out of the driveway, and as they drove away, the saucer flew away. These are people that are close friends of mine, or at least they were, and she still is. And I know they're not lying to me. And so you think that they're either making it up or whatever they're doing. But anyway, the second one is a little bit more interesting to me. A woman who lives about a block and a half from me, she was a physics student of mine about 25 years ago or whatever it was. She's got 11 kids, and she was out with them one night, and they were in their van. They came driving home. They parked in the driveway, and there were 3 of her daughters with her, and they got out of their van, and they looked, and there was a saucer above their house. All 4 of them saw it, and it was up there, and they watched it for a while, and eventually it started floating toward the north, which I found out later was, well, toward my house is what it started going, and then it just shot up into the sky. So there's an example of 4 people, and I've got, I don't know how many more examples. That's the kind of thing that
right.
Realize these people aren't all lying. They've had this.
Yeah, it can't be that.
I can go into alien abductions, and I've got a number of examples of that too, but we can come back to that if you want to. But anyway.
The interesting one to me is just Roswell is the most famous one that most people, that's top of mind, where you get this UFO crash. The paper releases a statement saying they've uncovered an alien spacecraft. Well, the military comes in the next day, they publish a news story saying it was actually a weather balloon. And weather balloons come up time and time again in sort of government releases of these crashes. So is it a cover-up? Why is it something that they're not?
That's an absolute cover-up. But this actually, Roswell really happened. And the general or the major that was involved in the investigation brought home some materials from the crash and showed it to his son and his family. And there's a big story behind that. But this was just a major cover-up of an actual thing that actually happened. And there's a lot can be. There've been a couple of movies made on it, and the whole thing. You can really go into it. I'll tell you what I can do. If you know what to request under the Freedom of Information Act, you can ask for different stuff, UFO related. You can't just write to the FBI and say, "Send me all your UFO stuff." It doesn't work that way. You have to ask for stuff explicitly. And so I did. I when I was still teaching at UNO, I wrote the FBI. You can't see this probably too well, but this is their letter that they sent back to me. I asked for a specific particular incident, and they sent it back. And here it is. I'll read it to you. This is just one of many examples I could give, but this is not Roswell, by the way. But this is the letter that was sent to me by the FBI. You can see some of it is redacted. They couldn't tell certain names and that sort of thing. But this is what it is. This was a letter sent to J. Edgar Hoover, who was head of the FBI at that time, and by one of the field investigators. It's Office Memorandum, United States Government, to the Director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, from Guy Hoddle, the Special Agent in charge in Washington. Subject: flying saucers, information concerning. Now, I'll read this letter to you. This is just an example of all kinds of stuff that I could go into. The following information was furnished to Special Agent blank by blank. That's the part that's crossed off. An investigator for the Air Forces stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. According to Mr. Blank, the informant, the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high-powered radar setup in that area, and it is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanism of the saucers. No further evaluation was attempted by Special Agent Blank concerning the above. Actually, the Army took over the investigation. This was sent to J. Edgar Hoover. You want to call this a joke to J. Edgar Hoover? I don't think so.
No.
Well, I mean, that's one document. I've got some more that we can talk about.
That is incredible.
There's a massive government cover-up. We can get into, there's other stuff I want to talk about too, but this is a big story. I'll tell you something. I won't go into too much detail, and we can talk more about the government cover-up as we go along here. Gordon Cooper, astronaut, and things that have happened. I have certain connections that other people don't, and people I know about and have told me certain things that other people don't know either. But I will say this, without going too much into detail. I know somebody that was invited by the government or military, probably the military, to go to the Pentagon and there to meet with a live extraterrestrial that was a guest of our government.
Right.
They had a 35-minute telepathic conversation. And at the end of that meeting, my friend told me he's a very religious person. He said it just shook him to the core of his being to be speaking telepathically with an extraterrestrial, and this was in the Pentagon. I mean, so if you want evidence for a cover-up, what more do you want? Unless you're actually there yourself, talking to this extraterrestrial. That's just another. Well, we could go on and on about that, but
this might be.
Pardon? Yeah.
It might be a goofy question, but I guess the fastest thing my mind goes to is, in your opinion, why this cover up for years? How long is this cover up going to last? Biggest thing is why. Like, what are we doing?
It's a really, really good question, and I have two answers for that. One is the one that is just given, that they didn't think that the general public could handle it, and there would be a massive panic.
Mm-hmm.
My experience, I started giving UFO talks in the 1980s. And if I could walk away from giving a talk and I had some people thinking possibly there is something to this, and we'll see, that changed until up to now. When I give a UFO talk, I started what I call level 2. People accept that this is true.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell them. And so maybe back in the late 1940s, that was smart, that don't cause a panic. I mean, we were in a Cold War, just came out of World War II, and what are you going to say? Well, we found some flying saucers flying around. They're from somewhere else, some other planet, and they're more powerful than we are, and there's nothing we can do about it. And now let's go on to the weather in our newscast.
Right.
That might have caused a panic. That's no longer true. That's one answer. Another possible answer, given to me by certain sources, is that the government slowly started getting involved in this. And step by step, it's like getting in quicksand or tar or something. They become more and more involved in it, to the extent that the public would become enraged by how much is being kept from them if they really came out with all this information. And so there's been a disinformation campaign to kind of poo-poo the whole thing, so that people really wouldn't accept it and believe it, because the government will cover your rear end, or whatever you want to think about it. That's another possibility why they kept it the way they did.
It's amazing that it works, though, because you talk about UFOs and people just sort of immediately laugh and count it off as just secondhand, like, okay, we're it's an alien guy or whatever. But I mean, if you look at all of the proof and all of these cover-ups, I mean, it's what they are. They're redacted stories, and they're video proof and proof from firsthand knowledge, like you're talking about. Like, why is it something that people just laugh off and aren't accepting at this point? It seems crazy.
Yeah. It's almost criminal, because if you think about it, this is one of the most important stories in the history of the world, that there is other life out there and they're visiting us. And so where does that take us? How much more life is there out there? And an example I like to give, some people usually bring up the objection that, how do they get here? They're light years away, hundreds of light years, thousands of light years away. Our galaxy is about 100,000 light years across from one side to the other. Light travels at about 186,000 miles per second. So a light year is how far light will go in a year, which is just short of 6 trillion miles. So how can they get here? Well, a couple answers to that. First of all, suppose there's a planet out there that is almost exactly like us, our twin sister planet, just about the same age and whatever the size and the whole business, just about the same, except maybe just a little bit older than we are. Now, the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. That's 4,500 million years old. What if this sister planet of ours is 4,501 million years old? They're 1 million years more advanced than we are.
Yeah.
And so their science would be magic to us. And as a matter of fact, here's an example I give. I'm going to use a sheet of paper. Supposing this is a planet and this is the Earth, and they want to travel through all that space and get to the Earth. Well, we know that gravitational fields can warp space. So if a planet is much more advanced than we are, they might warp and curve space to the extent that they curve it clear over here and they just jump off. That's it. And that fits our physics.
Mhm.
We are nowhere near being able to do that, but that fits with Einstein's general theory of relativity. So how do they get here? Well, that's one way they could get here.
So here's a question on that I've heard a lot, and it's, they come all this way. They're trillions of, they're millions of years more advanced than us. They get to Earth and they crash. Like, how is it that they're so far advanced and they crash when they arrive here?
That's another good question too. It could be that some of our electric systems send out microwaves or whatever the waves are that could be sent out. They probably have to have some of that physics involved with them too. And so maybe a lightning storm or something could crash them. You really wonder why they would crash, but yeah, that's a good question. But that's what happened in Roswell. And there have been other saucers recovered also. And I think, I don't have any evidence for this, but I suspect that sometimes we may have been able to shoot them down and get them that way. And some of them are in Area 51. That's one of the other things you mentioned, that there are probably saucers there that have been worked on, and the people there probably have some underground places where they're doing work on. I'm not sure that Area 51 is still there. They may have moved it, but in any case, when it was there, it's a real place where the Air Force did research. And so it's most likely that there were some saucers there that they were experimenting with and trying to back engineer. Maybe that's happened, that we get the science from these saucers and put that into our mainstream. Maybe that's some of the reason why we have our digital world that we have now. Who knows? Who knows? It's possible. But yeah.
They talk about like a industrial boom almost after the Roswell crash, right? That the SR-71 comes out soon after that, and things that we could have never imagined to do. Well, now they're testing it in the desert of Nevada, and it's just something that's happened before.
And that's certainly been brought up, and there have been certainly been jumps in technology after Roswell. I mean, Roswell was the late 40s or so, and there were bodies recovered there and taken probably to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's probably where they ended up. So, yeah. And again, I think Roswell was a definite case, and it was definitely trying to be covered up. And the first message was that we had a crashed saucer. And then they took it back the next day. Somebody probably said, stop it and don't let that get out. I mean, that's what happened, I'm sure. But that's just one of a number of examples we could talk. Russia is really very open about their stuff too. There are several things about a couple examples of Russia. Both of them are extraordinary. One of them is really extraordinary. What happened was two very large flying saucers were seen by the Russian Air Force. We're talking 100 to 200 meters in diameter, 1 to 2 football fields, two of them. And they sent up 22 jets to chase them. And they chased them, and they couldn't catch them. And they started running out of fuel, so they all had to come back and land. And there were 100 military units that saw this happen in Russia. That's not 100 soldiers in a field. That's 100 groups of military units that saw all this. The unit commanders wrote up the reports, sent them to the head of the Soviet Air Force. He read them, and he made statements. Just imagine somebody down here at Offutt making statements like this. I'll read the statement that he made. This is General Igor Maltsev, who is head of the Air Force in Russia. And he said, according to the evidence of the eyewitnesses, the UFO is a disk with a diameter from 100 to 200 meters. He's admitting they are huge flying saucers. And that's from and it flew this way and that, and they rotated, did an S-turn, and then hovered for a while, and then shot ahead faster than any jet that we have. It did this and that. It went from 1,000 to 7,000 meters in height, elevation. The movement of the UFOs was not accompanied by sound of any kind. Now, again, this is the head of the Air Force saying this. It was not accompanied by sound of any kind, and it was distinguished by its startling maneuverability. It seemed that the UFOs were completely devoid of inertia. And listen to this last sentence, what he says. In other words, they had somehow come to gravities. At the present time, terrestrial machines could hardly have any such capabilities. The head of the Soviet Air Force is saying that these were extraterrestrial spacecraft. And you can't get anybody higher than that in the military. And there, I don't know how many hundreds of witnesses there were to the whole thing, and the jets chased them. They couldn't catch them, the whole business. That's one example. A better example is this one. I wish I were able to. I've got about a 2.5 minute video. This was on Prime Time Live with Sam Donaldson a number of years ago. That is, forget what it's become now, on ABC. But turns out that and at a town about 75 miles from Moscow, about a 900-foot diameter saucer hovered over a Russian military silo for 4 hours. It was seen by everybody in the town. There was well, they had to have military there because of the missile silo. It had a missile silo, had a missile there with a warhead, nuclear warhead, and it was aimed at the United States. It hovered over that for 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hour period, and again, this is being reported on ABC, the control panel inside the silo started lighting up. The missiles were being prepared for launch against the United States. For 15 seconds, and the Russians were not doing it. For 15 seconds, the Russians lost control of their nuclear missile, and then it just stopped. And the Russians were so alarmed by this, they sent a 4-man crew from Moscow the next day. They went in there, they took the control panel apart, they put it back together. There was nothing wrong with the control panel. And that's what they did. And it's so alarmed then that I'll read this here. It says, no missiles were launched, but in an article 6 years later, in an issue of the magazine Soviet Military Review, Soviet military leaders made a strong case for exchanging UFO information on a regular basis with the West. They were afraid that the UFO would launch something and start a nuclear war.
Right.
So whatever that 900-foot diameter saucer was trying to show us, it showed us essentially that it was in charge, and they didn't like nuclear weapons, I guess. I don't know. You can draw your own conclusions. Mm-hmm. That's the most striking thing from Russia. There are a lot of, I got another bunch of things that we don't need to go into about Russia. Those are the two most alarming ones. Well, another one was this. Russia, the Air Force had a policy that if an Air Force jet saw a UFO and it was perceived as a threat, they were to chase it and shoot at it if they thought they should. They did this 40 times. In each of the 40 times, they tried to chase the UFO, and the UFO somehow knew what the jets were capable of, so it kept flying just faster than the jets could fly, and they never caught them. And on 3 of those occasions, the jets heated up their engines and crashed, and the pilots were killed. And after that happened, the Russians changed their policy and said, if you see a UFO, don't chase it anymore. Let it alone. And so those are just a few stories from Russia. They're a lot more open than we are. Although I hope June 1st is going to bring up some good announcements here.
what's going through my head right now is you're accounting all these events, specifically with Russia, I guess right now, but it's almost like frustrating, or I feel like I'm kind of going crazy in a way, because how can these, like military or government accounts be documented and be, like you're sitting in Omaha, Nebraska, and you're able to have that information.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, it's like I'm hearing it, and I'm like, it frustrates me, because it's like, how is this still a cover up? Not to go back to that idea, but I guess my main question here is, in your opinion, where do you see this timeline playing out for humans? Like, where does this stop becoming a cover up? Where does this?
Well, I'll give you Leo Sprinkle gave a talk here. He's a UFO researcher too. He gave a talk here a number of years ago. The answer, somebody asked him that. They said, do you think it's just around the corner that we're going to find out about all this stuff? And he said, yes, I do think that. He said, I thought about it in the 60s. I thought about it in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. And it just never seems to happen. Although we got these stories, well, when they come up, like Dave, you said, people make fun of it. And stories go away after 3 days. And then they go on to something else. And all this stuff I'm telling you is available.
Well, from the most respected people too. It's not like, Joe Schmo is just claiming something. It's leaders of the world right now who are making these claims.
That's right. Yeah. And what I just told you about the Russian stuff, there was a general that was interviewed in Russia. And there was a couple of UFO researchers went over there and got all this stuff. Some of it was really still classified in Russia, and they snuck out of Russia with it. And that's how we got some of this stuff. But the general just was very open about saying some of this stuff. They had a massive 10-year plan in Russia studying UFOs and the military and everything. And that's happening here too. And it's happening on a large scale too. The example I gave of, I don't want to identify him too much, but I know him. And he told me this. He went to the Pentagon. And he's a deeply religious person. And I can honestly say this, if he's lying to me, I don't know who on this whole planet I can really trust. And I really mean that. And he's not lying to me either. But if we had a guest, an alien guest in the Pentagon, what does that say? I mean, he wasn't being trapped. Yeah, I'm sure it could have gotten away anytime he wanted to. But that calls for a massive cover-up. And there are other things about General Eisenhower when he was president, that he met with some extraterrestrials. And, well, I could go on and on. Some neat one. Let me talk about Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, and bring a couple stories about him. He's since passed away, but when he was in the Air Force in Germany, and he said that they would fly up and do their maneuvers and stuff and all the practice runs and everything. He said one time over several days when they're flying, they saw hundreds of flying saucers flying above them, and they were higher than their jets could fly. They tried to go up, but they couldn't fly that high. And he said they were either huge and really far away, or still big but closer, but above them. And that happened several days. And they filed reports to their superiors. And a couple of months later, the answer came back that what they really saw were high-flying seed pods. And the interviewer that was interviewing him said, how could you possibly accept that? And he said, I was a pilot. I wanted to fly. He didn't want a desk job. That's one. And the next one is a bigger deal, too. He was a head of some photography group at Edwards Air Force Base in California. This was in the 1960s. And he had a film crew out on the runway, and they were trying to get film of the landing of some jets that they were testing. And so they're getting movies of that. And while they were out there, a flying saucer landed in a a creek bed right next to the runway. It put down 3 legs and landed. And they looked at it, and they had their cameras, and so they started walking toward it and getting movies of it. And they apparently started getting too close because at a certain time it angled up at a 45-degree angle and shot away at a tremendous speed. Well, they took the film to him. They told him about it, and he said, "What are we supposed to do with this?" And they told him, "Well, just send it to us in Washington, and we'll take care of it." And so the people developed the movies, and they took it over to his office to show it to him. There was a guy standing outside his office, and he said, "I want to have that film." And so they took it in to Cooper, and he didn't have time to put it in a movie projector, but he did string it up and looked at it, and he saw the saucer on the film. And so they gave it to the guy, and the guy took it to Washington, and no one has heard anything of it since. But Gordon Cooper says a saucer landed next to the runway at Edwards Air Force Base, and he saw the movie film of that. And he's one of our most illustrious astronauts. So, I mean, there's another example. I mean, I'm just going on and on with all this stuff here. But it shows
It's testament
is real. I mean,
out there.
if you are faced with all the stuff I've been telling you, how could you possibly say that it's all a hoax? It's as I said before, I know that this is true, and I know that that's what the situation is. And I have hopes that you did mention that the Navy has come out saying that they had this stuff that is real. There was about a 7-hourly programs on National Geographic that really went into a lot of the detail of this, and it was really, really good. And I think maybe that's some of the stuff we're going to get about some of the pilots and the military and what they saw and that sort of thing. So
Canada's former defense minister, he says there's 80 known alien species living among us today, like living among us.
Yeah, I think that is true. I have a little video too about 7 different kinds of extraterrestrials that have been reported by people. You can't tell me they all live on one planet. They certainly look a lot different from each other, but 7 different ones. And one of the groups look very human. They're taller than we are, and they're probably walking. That's probably true. I mean, it's probably true that there are extraterrestrials on this planet walking among us. Well, if one was in Washington at the Pentagon, who knows where the other ones are? Mm-hmm. I can get a little wilder with some of this stuff. You can talk about an exchange program and what that might imply. And I think we've got people that are willing to go to Mars for the rest of their life. So maybe there are people that would agree to be involved in an exchange program too. And there's not much more I can say about that. I don't have detailed information about it, except that I was told by someone that there was one, and maybe there still is. I don't know. Yeah.
That's wild. So you're saying maybe an alien life might want to switch places with the person and vice versa?
Yeah, that's the idea.
Wow.
Well, we've got adventuresome people. I certainly wouldn't want to do that. I've never been on board a craft. I'd love to try it if I knew they were going to bring me back.
My thing is, I just want to know, like, what's next. I think on the show before we've talked about, when I was a kid, it was like, it wasn't even scientifically really accepted that there was life somewhere else. And then at a certain age, it became like, okay, there's definitely life somewhere else. Well, then after that door was sort of kicked down, there might be UFOs out there or something. And then that was really crazy. And then all of a sudden, no, there's definitely UFOs. And then it was alien life has visited, and that's crazy. So I'm just, the progression, I just want to know what's next.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And as I mentioned, it's the biggest story in the history of mankind. And as I mentioned before, I know that they're here and they've already gotten here. And so I watch with interest the stuff that is going on Mars now. I think it's marvelous. We got that the rover up there driving around and sending us pictures and so on, searching for just the most basic form of life on Mars. And I think, boy, oh boy, they're already here. Why are we looking for micro? I guess we're going to do that, and then they'll say there's life somewhere else. But we're searching for little bacteria or microbes on Mars, and we've got all these extraterrestrials that are here and different ones. You know, we've got a pretty interesting, nice planet. Mountains and oceans and water is important, and all the stuff we've got here. It's a nice planet. It'd be a nice place to live for someone else that has maybe a dying planet and they have to get off of it or somehow and come here.
That's the thing. It's like we only know what we already know. And if there is more to know and we're focusing on like gas prices and like the bullshit of Earth, like that sucks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, and I think that we would be viewed as kind of savages because we have wars and all that kind of stuff here. We wouldn't look like very nice people for another group that's coming to visit us. And a question I get frequently enough is, how come we haven't been in contact with them? Well, we have, but it's not widely known. And if one of the reasons one of these alien civilizations come here is a scientific experiment, well, you don't just kind of land on the White House lawn and stuff. You just observe. If you want to observe an anthill, you don't go poking around and trying to find the queen. You just watch what they do. And maybe that's what maybe there's a scientific experiment. Who knows? That's one theory that's being thrown out there. And it's reasonable enough to me. I know no proof of it, but if there are a number of different civilizations here, that there's got to be a reason why they've decided to take a look at us.
Yeah.
And so I guess what is next? That's a good question. You wondered about what it's going to be like in 5 years. My first question is, what is it going to be like June 1st when this?
Yeah, you wonder if it's going to be
today. Yeah.
If it's another one of those where they just released, who is it? That there was the Galactic Federation. Some leader in Israel came out and said that there's a Galactic Federation, and the United States is actively working with alien life on like these government contracts to say, like you mentioned.
What is the source of that? I mean, I have heard of that, and I've heard that there is a Galactic Federation that is working with us, and at some point, you wonder, because you can really talk about what's really happening, and then you have what are called these fringe groups that are really far outside the whole situation, and I try to distinguish what's real and what's not. So, do you know where you heard that? I've heard that a number of times, that there is a.
That was on. Was that NBC, Luke?
I believe so.
I sent you an article where it's. I can pull the article back up, but basically that's where they're saying there's a Galactic Federation that exists, and they're actively working with us. And again, it's something where it's like you say, June 1st. I agree, it's something to look forward to. I just worry that it's going to get swept under the rug, like all of these other articles and all this other proof.
Well, June 4th, it'll be gone. Yeah, something like that.
Right.
But that could be another reason why this is being kept secret. If they're working with a Galactic Federation, then who knows?
Yeah, I'll send you over just in this chat the link to that in case you're interested in reading it after the fact. But yeah, that it says there, Space Security Chief Israel. He talks about the Galactic Federation. So
the security chief in Israel came up with that.
And NBC ran the story.
I would like to track that down. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
But sorry, Luke, I interrupted you. Go on.
Well, no, it really it's just same thing. I think I'm somewhat being redundant here. It's just what is it gonna take for a globalized realization that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Of an alien invasion. I know that sounds somewhat ridiculous, but it doesn't. The more we talk, it's just like, what is it going to take for this to not be something that 3 people have to talk about on a podcast, and then
Yeah.
watches it, and these guys are crazy, and it's like this is actually, I guess, the future.
Well, you got to figure it scares the crap out of people who have money, right? It ruins our entire economy if we have spacecraft that don't need gasoline, and if we have weapons that end the entire planet. We don't have to, it changes our entire existence, I feel like, as we know it.
Yeah.
It will have an economic impact. That's right. And and you can have cars that don't need gas, and that's a good example. And cars that can levitate. I mean, these UFOs, it can just float in the air. They're able to counter gravity somehow, and maybe somehow they can set up a magnetic field that interacts with the Earth's magnetic field so that they can hover up there. But that's what they do, and then they fly off at tremendous speeds. And that's what he says here in this article, if I can find it again. But he says, whoops, that's page 2. He says, I want to get the exact quote if I can. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, that's who you mentioned also. He says that it's not just a pilot or just a satellite or some intelligent collection. We have multiple sensors that are picking up these things. And then he says, elements that are hard to explain in these unreleased sightings include movements that are hard to replicate or traveling at speeds that exceed the sound barrier without creating a sonic boom. There's a good example of, there's another example we could tell what happened in Belgium. And it was seen by at least 10,000 people over several months. They saw these triangular shaped things, and they would hover and stop and travel at 25 miles an hour, then shoot off to the horizon. Sometimes they shoot back. And what happened in one particular case, this one was spotted by 3 different radars that they have in Belgium. One that was a NATO's radar, and one that tracks all the stuff flying in Belgian space. 3 different ones tracked this one UFO, and they set up two jets to chase it, and they chased it, and as soon as they locked on to it so that they wouldn't lose it, they would lock on if they were going to fire a missile, and then if the missile was shot, it would not miss. Now, they weren't going to fire at it, but they were locking on. As soon as they locked on, whoever was flying that thing shot up and down away and then below radar range, and in doing it did something that humans couldn't survive. It went from about 190 miles an hour to about 1,100 miles an hour in 1 second.
What?
That's an acceleration of 40 Gs. That would kill a human pilot.
Yeah.
So whatever was flying that thing was not human. Or else there are ways to explain that with physics that we really don't have. For example, they could generate a gravitational field that would enable them to bend and accelerate at 90-degree angles and so on without bending the person and destroying the person. For example, imagine you go to the top of a 5-story building and you jump off. Well, you're being pulled down by gravity. Every molecule in your body is being pulled down by gravity at the same time. So you're not being distorted. It's when you land that it gets bad, because you're stopped in the different parts of your body, stop at different rates, and you're hurt. But when you're being in a gravitational field, and if you're accelerating down, there's no problem. And if you could set it up so that the acceleration could be in a regular type of field in the craft, then you could move at tremendous accelerations, and you would not
It's almost like the pressure in an airplane cabin, but with gravity instead of the air pressure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and if you are accelerated at 40 Gs, and if each one of your molecules in your body is accelerated at the same rate, you could survive that. If you're accelerated at 40 Gs and you're sitting in your seat and you're accelerated, your body is going to be squished together. But if it's all accelerated together, you can survive that. And that's easy science to understand. And maybe that's what happens. I mean, but that's what happened. It went from 190 miles an hour to 1,100 miles an hour in 1 second. And that would kill a human pilot. I made a calculation once. It's like driving a car at 100 miles an hour into a concrete wall 20 straight times. That's what that's like, that acceleration is. So that's what it did. That's what it did.
This might
Belgium, yeah.
But
and Belgium was very open about it. They had the Belgian physicists analyze it, and it was very open, publicized, and everything. And that was the big story in Belgium. And it took, this was happened in March of 1990, I think, and it took till August before that was even mentioned very briefly in the United States in the press. So it's well, that's what's happening, and we're hoping.
On this topic of overarching physics, again, I'm out of my league here, but with this question, do you think there's any room to the idea that, again, this might sound ridiculous, but
probably not. Go ahead.
The laws of physics on Earth that we've come to understand, there might be a two-part question here. I guess, where does that go forward? Like, where are our frontiers? Where are we trying to, what are our next steps in that? But then that set aside, is there any room that there's a possibility that the laws of physics are somewhat, the best word I can think of, are different, in another part of the galaxy, another part of the universe?
Yeah,
I'm sure of our physics that humans have discovered that we claim as our laws of physics.
Yeah,
because we see these technologies.
That's a good question. And what appears to be is that the laws of physics and chemistry are the same throughout the entire universe, and that's how we can figure out the structure of stars and so on. I mean, it seems like, and the gravity seems to behave that way. Even with our own galaxy, you got 100,000 light year diameter, but then near galaxies are a few 100,000, and then millions of light years and billions of light years away, and it seems like they all react to the same gravitational laws, and it seems like that's what it is, and it seems like all the elements are the same, and the stars are made up of the elements that we have on the Earth, mostly hydrogen, and
does it propose that we're just somewhat primitive in our advance?
Yeah, well, we're somewhat primitive compared to that one planet that's like us, but they're a million years more advanced.
It'd be like a cave person sees an iPhone, right? Like it would appear to be magic.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look where we are now compared to 100 years ago.
Oh, I know.
Go back into the 1800s. Somebody made a prediction in the late 1800s that in the next 50 to 70 years, all the roads would be covered with horse manure, because that's what we used. And that's what they're doing all the time. And things changed, and we got cars. And look at how much different. When I was in grade school, in the 1950s, the big thing in the comics, we read the comics every day. Dick Tracy had this wristwatch that he could talk into and talk to people around the whole world. I mean, my goodness, we thought. But now everybody has that. Everybody has a phone that you can talk to anybody around the whole world. And that's what 150 years, or in the last 50 years, that's happened.
Well, so it was only 40 or so years the internet came out, right? Like
that's right. Yeah.
Really young technology at this point.
Yeah.
When you say the I hadn't heard it put like that before, but when you say like a million years in advancement compared to where we're at right now, like it doesn't seem so far-fetched then when you think about it like that.
Yeah, and another way of, well, we know that wormholes exist, and there might be a way of plunging through a wormhole to get to somewhere else in the universe, and that'd be another way to travel from here to there. And so we can think about that, and we can model our physics with it. Einstein's general theory of relativity is the theory of gravity, and black holes and wormholes are part of that. All we can do is talk about it now, but what if we could just kind of get control of that? And well, we probably will in a million years if we're still here. We haven't blown ourselves up by that time. But yeah, I mean, that's right. So from that point of view, we are babies.
Right.
From the point of view of 100 or 200 years ago, we're extremely advanced. And so the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, I think, is a waste of time. This is trying to listen to signals from other intelligences out there and trying to send signals to other intelligence using radio waves. Well, that's where we are. Maybe the other people are so far advanced that they don't use radio waves anymore. And I think listening for signals from outer space is frustrating to me too, because they're already here. I don't care what somebody out there is going to say. They're already here, and they're already living among us. And if we might try to find microbes on Mars, that's good science. Yeah, it is. But they're already here too, living and walking among us, like we said.
It's so frustrating because it's if I become president tomorrow, like, do I learn something new? And do I learn that like new in regard to extraterrestrial life? And it just doesn't seem fair that if there is this information out there, like, why aren't we focusing more on this, which pushes our like species forward, and we're focused on all these, like I said before, all these stupid problems that we have.
Well, you bring up president. There's a Jimmy Carter. Before he was elected, he said, if I'm elected president, I'm going to bring this whole UFO thing out, because he saw one. And he said, I'm going to bring the whole thing out and release all the information. And then he got as president, and somebody got to him.
They said, no, you're not.
Yeah. And then it was brought up to him, and he would brush it off after that. He never did. And so that was part of the game at that time. This was top secret stuff. And I had a security clearance when I worked in Livermore, and nobody really talked about UFOs. And we were doing all our other stuff that we were doing on our research. But you only did research on what there was a need to know. And none of us had any reason to know anything about UFOs in our work. And so never came up.
And so that is the idea that I work on one part of the puzzle, they work on another part of the puzzle, and nobody ever knows how they're interconnecting with each other.
That's right. And you're given enough information to do your work, but at the same time, you don't know all of what's going on. And there are, even at the level of top secret, there are compartmentalized places. And UFOs were, and maybe still are, at many levels above top secret. And at one time, UFOs were the most highly classified thing in the United States, more classified than hydrogen bombs even. And there was a Canadian that worked with us on UFOs. Wilbur Smith was his name, and that's what he said, that our government knew about UFOs, and it was an extremely highly classified topic, more highly classified than hydrogen bombs. And what I told you that I know from my friend about the Pentagon would normally be highly classified information. But the thing about it is, something isn't classified until it's classified. And that means that people that have high clearance have to look at it and decide this has to be top secret.
Sure.
No one's done that to my knowledge. And so
Well, if we get a knock at the door from Uncle Sam, we'll know what they're here for.
they haven't been around lately, but as far as I know, this has not. I mean, what I told you, because of the content, is top secret content. But I don't. Well, at least I don't know that it's been classified, and so I can tell you.
That's incredible.
Without going into, there's a lot more details about that I could go into.
Well, Dr. Kasher, I want to give you an opportunity to say any closing things. We typically do these for about an hour, so
yeah.
I think we covered a ton of ground, and it's all mind blowing. I mean, it seems like we're talking about something that's so obvious at this point that it's almost crazy to me that people think it's crazy. So. Yeah. Again, just give you the floor here. Any opportunity to say any final closing thoughts or anything?
I can repeat what I said at the beginning. What I really believe, this is real. UFOs, extraterrestrials are visiting the Earth. They are visiting the Earth, and there is a government cover-up of UFO information. So anybody can make fun of it if they want to. But this is part of the frame of reference that we are living in. It's real, and people that have seen UFOs, saucers, know that it's real. And we didn't even get into the alien abduction business. I know a number of people in Omaha that have been abducted by extraterrestrials. At one point, there was a group here of 60 people that would meet every month to talk about this whole thing. Wow. That felt that they have been abducted by extraterrestrials. And that's the whole program. And this stuff is real. And it really is true. And it's part of who we are. And it shows us that we're not alone in the universe. And that's pretty much the whole ball game, I guess.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It sounds like we'll have to do another episode just solely dedicated to alien contact. But thank you.
First, I guess. Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Luke, I know he feels the same. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Kasher.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.